This program, while curated to help you improve your health, contains general advice and should not replace the individual advice of your medical practitioner.
What do you think the role of the microbiome and gut health is on reproductive health and fertility?
Well, it is very significant, like all the microbiomes are. But if we look at the gut microbiome, we know that there's a huge communication between the gut microbiome, the brain, and even the ovary.
Why do you think so many people are anxious and not sleeping well?
Because everyone has circadian rhythm dysfunction. Males were used as the source of the fecal material for a transplant into a female. The female started making a lot of testosterone. That's how phenomenal this is.
In life, it's normal to have ups and downs. But what do we do when we get stuck? I've always been fascinated by the healing journey. Why do some people get better while others fail to make the shift? Welcome to the Expert Series, where you'll meet 25 of the world leaders in health and wellness, discussing their passions and what it takes to make your shift.
There's an electrical feeling in the room.
I had to be a mom. It was so important to me.
I've always been a pain in the butt, and I love that.
I knew that I wanted to help people.
I'm Katherine Maslen, and this is The Shift. Hi, I'm Katherine Maslen, naturopath, author and host of The Shift. In the Expert Series, we share the insights, stories and expertise of each of our amazing experts. You might have met them on season 1 of The Shift, where we took snippets of these conversations and put them together into the series. If you haven't listened to season 1 yet, I'd recommend going back and listening to episode 1 on what it takes to make a shift in your gut health. We'll provide a link in the show notes. Welcome to part 2 of my conversation with Dr. Felice Gersh, an integrative gynecologist from California. If you're new, I'd recommend jumping back to the last episode where we began our conversation. Let's jump back in.
Do you think that the practice of wiping the vaginal juices on the baby is helpful?
It's so interesting you asked that. At least 10 years ago, I went to the head of the maternal fetal medicine department at my local hospital, which had an academic affiliation. And I went to the head of the department. I said, I have this idea. Why don't we do this for C-section babies? Why don't we get a swab, like say Raytec, the sponges, and then wipe the mom's vagina out. And then before you start doing all that betadine and all that cleaning that they always do for C-sections, they wash everything down with these antiseptics. But before you do that, get the swabs from the mom's vagina and then smear it all over the baby. He looked at me like I was insane. He really shut me up. I was this is like a good decade or so, and I was pretty intimidated. Well, I'd be less intimidated these days, but and then it was after that other people started talking about it. But I had, years before it even came out, I actually presented that as an idea to the head of the department, who shot me down royally. But the data is still very weak on doing that in terms of what it means. We don't have a lot. There was one small study, and it didn't show a lot of benefit. But we don't really know what that means in the long term, or even if they did it right or who knows what. But I still think it's a great idea.
You mentioned the ovarian and the uterine microbiome. Can you tell me about that?
We don't know too much about it. When I was in medical school, I was taught that everything from the opening of the cervix and north was sterile. We were told that all that stuff was sterile. I was taught the bladder was sterile, the uterus, the cervical canal, the fallopian tubes, the ovaries, that all those were sterile. Now when I think back, it's like, how could I even have thought that? I thought, was there a sign at the opening of the cervix that says bacteria, no entry allowed? How could that possibly work? The idea that the cervical mucus was bactericidal to the point where every single microbe would be dead instantly. There was no data for any of that. And if it's so fatal, how come the sperm aren't dead? How would they get through? There was absolutely no logic. If you think that, how could sperm get through the cervical canal up into the uterus and fallopian tubes. How could that happen if all the bacteria are killed? I mean, it makes no sense. And yet I was so accepting, like, these are experts. They know better than me, And it's like, now I don't trust any academics at all, because unfortunately there are always great ones, but there are many that are more shills for the big pharmaceutical companies, But no one was, working for a pharmaceutical company when they said that everything above the cervix is sterile. That's just plain ridiculousness when you think about it. How could the bladder be sterile? Like from the urethra, at the opening of the urethra, there's also a sign that says no entry for bacteria. What would keep them out? Nothing keeps them out, You can't. So, of course, everything has a microbiome. The bladder has a microbiome, the uterine cavity, the fallopian tubes, the ovaries, but we don't know much about it. But they had the study that showed that in ovarian cancer, and this is very telling, that the microbiome is different. And there's been a lot of buzz about the talc issue. So women have used talcum powder, and I don't know why. It's like, why do they use things to be fresh? I mean, why are they putting talcum powder on their, genital parts? What the heck is that about? But they would put talcum powder, and the talcum powder could get from the outside vulvar skin into the ovary. Now, how could that happen? I mean, it just tells you right there that things can travel, right? And then that's associated with now a belief that it can increase ovarian cancer. So anything that can get up there, an altered microbiome and so on. It's always hard to say cause and effect, which came first, because we don't know yet, because it's very hard to do ovarian microbiome studies. But we do know that it has its own unique microbiome, and when it's not normal, when it's not what it should be, that there is an association with ovarian cancer.
Imagine if the bacterial balance is, signaling to the body that it's time to go into the labor. It's signaling to the egg that's released from the ovary that this is the way that you need to go. It's interesting because you get patients that have one fallopian tube removed and they'll ovulate from that side and it will somehow make its way around into the other tube. I don't know if you've seen that before.
It can happen. Well, they know this from tubal pregnancies, that a woman could have only one ovary, and the tubal pregnancy occurred on that side that didn't have an ovary. So obviously the egg came from the other side, and yet it got stuck in the wrong tube, Yeah,
it's fascinating, isn't it, when you think about it?
It really is, and all the triggers for all these like critical points, like, how does ovulation actually occur and at just the right time? And how does the egg match up with the sperm and get transported down the fallopian tube at just the right rate so that it's matured just to the right point when it enters the uterine cavity. And then it gets into the muscle just at the right moment when it's just at the right number of cells. It's mind-boggling how incredible this is. And now as fertility is declining across the board all over the world, we see how fragile the system really is and how we're really teetering and we're on thin ice now, that we can actually go to the tipping point. Now, we have so many people on Earth, people say, how could this be a problem? But it can be a problem if fertility becomes a massive issue across the world and we can't replace our populations, then that will be a problem.
If this episode is leaving you wanting more, I'll be hosting a live webinar on gut health. Join me and get the opportunity to get your gut health questions answered. Go to theshiftclinic.com/webinar. See you there.
The Shift!
What do you think the role of the microbiome and gut health is on reproductive health and fertility?
Well, it is very significant, like all the microbiomes are. But if we look at the gut microbiome, we know that there's a huge communication between the gut microbiome, the brain, and even the ovary. So there is a relationship to everything. The ovary, actually, when you have a dysbiotic gut microbiome and you have a lot of inflammation, so when you have the wrong bacteria growing in the gut and you have impaired gut barrier function, because if you don't have the right microbes in the gut, then the microbes work in conjunction, the right ones, work in conjunction with specialized cells that are in our lining of our gut called goblet cells that make mucus. So together they create this really amazing protective mucus coating that keeps toxins, we call them endotoxins or lipopolysaccharides, that are these toxic components of bad bacteria, from crossing the line, through the spaces between the lining cells of the gut and into our body proper, where there's a lot of immune cells that are ready and poised to release inflammation at the first sign of an invader. That's their role. But when you have a constant bombardment of toxins, they're going to release inflammation on a continual basis. When you have chronic inflammation that's released by these inflammatory cells, it communicates with the brain. We know there's the gut-brain axis, and you can call it the gut-brain immune axis, because the immune cells are really the interface between the gut and the brain. And along with the vagus nerve and the short-chain fatty acids that are the metabolites of fermentation. It's a whole amazing and complex, perfect system when things are right. And when you have things wrong and you have a dysbiotic gut and then the brain is impacted, then that can change the signaling. After all, the brain is in charge of the ovaries, in charge of everything. And the rhythms are all guided by our hormones and so on. But when you have inflammation, it changes everything. It changes like our cortisol production, which everyone knows. It's like that, along with melatonin, is extremely circadian, right? And inflammation can change that whole thing. That's how stress can also change it. So inflammation, stress, they can all have similar effects and can block ovulation. That's why women who are stressed, whether it's emotional or a bad gut, and they have inflammation circulating in their body, creating neuroinflammation, it affects the sections of the brain, like the hypothalamus, to put out the proper signals to keep the ovaries working properly, to keep this incredible process of ovulation and fertilization going. So when you have an abnormal gut microbial population, yes, it can change your cycles. And of course, it not only changes your cycles that they can become irregular and that you're not ovulating, you can also get terrible periods where they're extra heavy, where there's more pain and cramping, because the ovaries actually also become inflamed. The inflammation that's created from the gut dysbiosis circulates, and you have generalized inflammation, and it can cause inflammation in the ovaries, which can then, of course, not only alter the act of ovulation, but ends up changing everything. And you get inflammation that goes out of control in the uterus. So every time a woman has a period, she makes these little inflammatory products called prostaglandins. And they have a natural role because a menstrual period is an inflammatory state naturally, because you're putting out all this necrosis and dying tissue from inside the lining. And the uterus naturally will have some contractions or cramping, but it should be mild. And that helps the uterine lining products to come out, because your body has to get rid of it. And a little bit of cramping, just a little bit, can help push it out. But all of these systems are out of control. So you have the wrong microbiomes, you're getting the wrong signals, and then you're producing too much of this prostaglandin. And you get too much inflammation in the uterus. So you get really bad cramps and heavy periods. And of course, then that leads to the girls being put immediately on birth control pills, which is not fixing it. Because it's really important for every one of your listeners to know that the menstrual cycle is a vital sign of female health. When the menstrual cycle is abnormal, whether it's very heavy periods, irregular cycles, really bad cramps, that is a red flag that the young woman who has those terrible periods has problems. She may have nutrient deficiencies, like magnesium is a very key one. She may have systemic inflammation, gut dysbiosis, vaginal abnormalities with the microbiome. The solution is to find the problem and fix it, not to whitewash it, by trying to cover it up with birth control pills, because you're just kicking the can down the road. The day of reckoning will come. And then this young girl down the road is going to have terrible bones, more gut problems, irritable bowel syndrome, high rates, significantly increased rates of autoimmune disease, depression, anxiety, insomnia. I mean, just really bad stuff is in her future. And we are just not paying attention to this. So when a woman has a bad menstrual cycle, whatever that problem is, we need to try to fix her. The menstrual cycle is really a tremendous clue as to the general health of that woman. That's why ancient civilizations worshipped fertility gods. How come they were so much smarter than us? They knew that fertility was a sign of health. We seem to have forgotten that, along with a lot of other stuff.
Why are women at more risk of disease generally?
Well, it depends on what disease we talk about. Women and men are so different. This is one of the terrible things. Up until 2015, the NIH, National Institutes of Health in the US, made no requirement to distinguish who the subjects of a study were, whether they were male or female. And what I can tell you is they were always male, because females are complex. So if you do a study with women, you have to know, are they in menopause or not in menopause? Are they on hormone therapy or not? Are they reproductive? Where are they in their cycle? Are they on some form of contraceptive? What if they get pregnant and ruin the whole study, right? So no one wants women in their studies. So all the cardiovascular studies, everything that you know of as a study, they were with men. Now they have to at least say how many women, how many men, but they still don't want women. So most studies, we have nothing for women. But women and men are really incredibly different. Women have very different immune systems. We have more B cells. We make more antibodies. We have more dendritic cells. Those are the cells that communicate between the innate and the adaptive immune system. So they're like the interface between the immune cells that are the first responders to an infection or an invader, and then they communicate to the cells that make antibodies. Women have more immune cells in general, and they respond more rapidly. So they're like more sensitive. So female mast cells, for example, which are the immune cells of the body, what are called the first responders, they are packed with preformed inflammatory contents. So they're like explode on contact. They're like grenades or mines that are lining all of our interfaces between our bodies and the outside world. Women's mast cells explode more readily than men's. That's why women are more prone to allergies, to hives, and so on. Of course, men can get these things too. Women are more prone. Women are dramatically more at risk for autoimmune diseases. For example, like 80%. What the immune system is doing in so-called autoimmune disease is attacking invaders, like viruses and bacteria. And women, like you were inferring, women are better at fighting off invaders. They are much better. So women, for example, if there's an epidemic of something, we'll say a flu epidemic, women are more likely to survive than men. And it's all about survival of the species. So if you have a situation where 10 women survive to every male, guess what? That can work. That's a busy guy with the 10 women, but they can replace the population. If you have a situation where you have 10 men survive and 1 woman, good luck. We're goners, she can't replace the population. So nature wants women to survive, to repopulate if there's, a plague or some kind of epidemic. Women are way more likely to survive an infection. So now we understand autoimmune disease. Women's immune system fight infections better than men. But now we have a world of chronic infections because all our barriers are broken. They're all leaky. Pick any barrier, they're all leaky. And these invaders, these hordes of viruses and bacteria and parasites and fungus and all, they're coming into our body by the droves. Our immune systems are not able to get rid of them. It's just the numbers are overwhelming. We can't handle it. So we end up in a state of chronic infection. In the old days, we would just often die. When you had an overwhelming infection, you died. Now it's really a strange new situation where we have a low-grade chronic infection. The immune system is endlessly battling this infection. And it turns out, and this is very new discoveries just in the last several years, that RNA and DNA of viruses and bacteria are incredibly similar to the RNA and DNA of humans, that it's the same. We have almost all the same sequences. It's unbelievable. So the bacteria and the virus are really the target. our cells are caught in the crossfire. So it's not a case of mistaken identity at all. The immune system is doing what it's designed to do, which is fight infection. It's just that it's doing it chronically. Normally, we're designed for acute infections. You either live or die. Now we have a brand new state of chronic infection, and the immune system is just doing what it's supposed to do. It's trying to kill, and our cells are just similar. So it's not mistaken identity. It's just that there's such an overlap, and we were never designed for chronic infections. So there's a whole bunch of things that our bodies really were never evolved for, but now they're just living with it, like chronic infections. So our whole view of what autoimmunity is really needs to change.
Tell me a little bit about chronic fungal infections or bacterial vaginosis and really vaginal dysbiosis. Are you seeing more and more of that, and what can people do about it?
Yes, it's very, very prevalent, and so many women are suffering, and they go in, like I mentioned, they just keep getting the same drugs over and over. Now we know that drugs like diflucan have tremendous resistance. A lot of the different forms of yeast have now become resistant to all the traditional therapies. Very often, they'll be using chemicals in the vagina, the glyphosate tampons. They'll be using all these other products. They'll be on birth control pills, or they have some sort of IUD. We have to recognize that these devices and pills and IUDs are harming the vaginal microbiome, basically doing everything to destroy the natural state of the vagina, and then we just keep throwing antibiotics and antifungals at it. And of course, it's never really fixing it. The other thing that happens, and when you have the abnormal infections, they're not just free-floating yeast or bacteria. These are biofilms. So a biofilm, my analogy for that is like a hornet's nest. So if you have a bunch of hornets in a nest, but the only ones you kill are the ones that are flying free, and you get some bug spray and you just kind of spray each of the hornets as they're flying around, but you don't touch the hornet's nest, you're going to have perpetual problems because they're going to come back. They're still there breeding and doing their thing. So when you have a biofilm, that's like a hive. Okay, so that's a complex like web of, and it usually includes some kind of heavy metals, and it usually includes some fungus and bacteria. They're very complex, and if you don't destroy the biofilm, you can't get rid of the infection. You can just make it better because you're getting the ones that are loose, but the symptoms will come back because the source of the infection, the biofilm, hasn't been touched. I'm actually looking into some new trials using ozone, like ozone water, because ozone is O3. It's very unstable. It's also very toxic to every living thing. But if you use just a little bit of it in the vagina, some women are finding that you can actually kill out the biofilm and do better. We need more data. But that may be very helpful for women who have chronic infections and these biofilms. The more conventional functional medicine approach is to give enzymes, high doses of enzymes between meals, not used as a digestive enzyme, but rather as a dissolving enzyme. Once again, we have very little data.
We're only just starting to get some half-decent technology that looks at mapping the microbiome to then know, okay, well, what do we need to eat? What do we need to do? But it's so rudimentary. It's going to be a while, I think. But eventually, it would be very cool if we could swab our microbiome and go, okay, these are the different phytochemicals or nutrients or interventions that we're going to use that will work for you. But it can be a bit of trial and error at the moment, I think.
Absolutely. And full disclosure, I'm actually on the medical advisory board of a company, and I'm going to hopefully get some studies going. It's uBiome, and they have a smart gut test that looks at the gut microbiome, and Smart Jane, which looks at the vaginal microbiome, and they're very interested in getting studies. So actually, if someone is interested in doing a study, to please contact me because they can get funding.
Oh, wonderful. That's actually really good to know because you're right. There's a few more of these companies coming up doing microbiome mapping, but not vaginal. And I think that's really fantastic.
It really is. I'm so excited that I could be part of that and maybe really make some headway into understanding what's really normal. If we can find anyone who's normal, that's the question, How are we going to find, it's like finding babies that never got immunizations or antibiotics by age 2. It's really hard to find them.
It's like the Amish or something.
Yeah, it's really hard to find. To find a perfect vagina. Where do you find it now? So we don't even know what normal is, So that's really a challenge.
So I've got a 6-year-old daughter, and we did full preconception care, like natural delivery. No,
Good for you.
She's never had antibiotics. So she's
oh my
6.
gosh. Well, she is the one to find out what's normal.
She's the one, but also I'm saving her for if I ever should need a fecal microbial transplant as well. I thought, she's a good reservoir. It'd be good to just keep her really healthy.
I might get on your waiting list.
Yeah. Because there's very far and few between children.
There's a huge demand for such children to donate fecal material. I want to mention that when you do fecal transplants, it should always be with the same gender. That's part of the huge differences between males and females. We really have different microbiomes. And one thing that's really interesting, now that we've done fecal transplants because of like Clostridia difficile and so on, there are cases where males were used as the source of the fecal material for a transplant into a female. The female started making a lot of testosterone. That's how phenomenal this is. So it just tells you the incredible link that we're just scratching the surface on between the gut microbiome and reproductive health. We are really at the beginning of understanding how to use fecal transplants, how to use probiotics, because there's a lot of individual variation. There were studies out of Israel showing that depending on the gut microbiome, and now we have such crazy gut microbiomes, you can give the same food, and we're talking about like healthy food, real food, whole food. You can give the same food to different people, and you get tremendously different glycemic response. So in some people, the glucose level shoots up, their insulin shoots up, and in others, it stays nice and low. And it all seems to depend on the gut microbiome. And we're just barely scratching the surface when we give people diets. We don't even know what it's really doing to different people with their guts. But the first step in doing anything useful is to recognize the problem. I really hope that we can get research on how to really repair it. And it may turn out that we don't really know how to repair it. We have to find those isolated people like your daughter, and they're just going to have to poop like crazy. And they do, so that's the good news. And then just share the wealth. Then that's all we can do. And try to restart. We have to literally reboot the gut.
Yeah. The good news is that we're not going to run out of poo, so that's good.
It's just running out of good poo.
Right.
Want to look deeper into your own health? Our virtual naturopathic team help people from all over the world to shift their health and their life. We offer a 90-minute online discovery and diagnostic session where you can find out where you're at, why you're here, and what you need to do about it. Everyone is so unique, and sometimes it can help to have someone break down your journey and see where it is that you need to head next. To find out more, go to theshiftclinic.com and click on Shift with Us.
The Shift!
What's the most bothersome symptom that people come presenting to your practice with?
Oh, there's so many. Probably anxiety and insomnia. I hate to say it, but that's an epidemic.
Absolutely. Why do you think so many people are anxious and not sleeping well?
Because everyone has circadian rhythm dysfunction, and it's such a problem. We use our computers at night. We're watching television. We have massive doses of electromagnetic radiation. I'm so fearful of what 5G is going to do to our planet and our human and all living forms. So when you have circadian rhythm dysfunction, we now know that that's incredibly linked to mental health. In fact, people who have like autism, schizophrenia, depression, they always have circadian rhythm dysfunction. And circadian rhythm, it turns out, is the master of everything. It's like 1/3 of all of our genes in our body are clock genes. And about 90% are linked to clock genes. So basically, every function in our body is timed in some fashion to the 24-hour rotation of Earth. And it's all about survival. We are diurnal. For example, bats are nocturnal. Diurnal means we are primarily active in the day. And now 1/3 of people work at night. I did for 25 years. I was really messed up. I'm trying to still heal, from all those deliveries. And I didn't understand. I kept saying, isn't that a wives' tale that women go into labor at night? No, that's not a wives' tale because labor is circadian. Because what is more appropriate for survival purposes than for a helpless woman to go into labor during the dark? Because she's cloaked in darkness. She has some safety because most of the predators are asleep. So it's a survival. Everything has evolved for reproductive success, which means you have to survive, right? If you're not alive, you're not going to be reproductively successful. So, of course, women would all go into labor during the night. Well, unfortunately, I was working most every night. I had calls, I was running around. So talk about circadian rhythm dysfunction. It was terrible for me. But now we have a society where 1/3 of people are working at night. And the people who aren't working at night are all messed up anyway. You know, with all the blue light, the staying up late. A lot of people, they make their own choice to stay up late. You know, they work late or whatever. And so many people have circadian dysfunction that they actually have flipped circadian cortisols. So their cortisol is supposed to be the highest in the morning to energize you when you wake up, to give you an appetite, and so on. But they're not. They have low cortisol in the morning, so they wake up and they're dragging. They need all their coffee because they're like no energy. And then at night, when their cortisol should be rock bottom, it suddenly spikes up. So they feel like, oh, I'm just really a night owl. Well, wait a minute, you're screwed up. There's no such thing as a human night owl. That's an owl, not a human. And so when people say, I feel better at 9 or 10 o'clock at night, that's like, just like a menstrual cycle is a vital sign of women's health. If you feel more energetic at night and you're dragging in the morning, you have major circadian dysfunction. That's associated with fatigue and depression and anxiety. They all are linked together.
I love it. I have 2 last questions. The first one is, this program's called The Shift, and we all have these shifts in our life and our health. Can you tell me a time in your life where there was a really significant shift that changed things for you?
Well, this is like a really painful thing, but I actually had 5 children, and I had a son who died. So talk about a shift. And so that changed my outlook on everything, you know, because it was so much suffering. I think it made me even more empathetic. And I almost have like a sixth sense of people's emotions. So I think it was a hugely transformational event for me. I made a conscious decision that I would not let it destroy me, that would have no purpose. You know, people even said to me, like, how can you go on? It's like, let's see, what is my choice? Should I go jump off a cliff? Like, what is that going to accomplish? And I already had a daughter at that point. So that's not an option. So it made me understand that tragedies happen of all sorts to many people, and you have to make gigantic decisions about how you're going to deal with it. And so that was a huge shift for me in making a very conscious decision that I was going to continue. I was already a doctor at that time. I was in training in my residency, that I was going to really dedicate my life to always doing the right thing to help other people and to help women deal with whatever tragedies or challenges that they would face in their own lives.
How old was your son when he passed?
He was 1.5 years.
Wow. That's really massive, but also really powerful, you know, to have that and have gone through that and come out the other side as well. So one last question. If you could give just one piece of advice to somebody that wanted to make a shift in their health, what would it be?
Find what you're passionate about. Find what you love. We now know that a life without purpose is always a sad life. If you look at one thing that is associated with very high mortality, it's loneliness and lack of purpose. When they look at what they call the superagers, the people who have the mental function of someone who's 40 or 50 when they're 80 and 90, one of the things that distinguishes them is actually not their diet or their exercise. Not that those are unimportant, they're incredibly important, but it's having social interactions, love in their life, and purpose. So you have to start with having love and purpose and relationships with other people in order to be a happy, successful human.
Oh, thank you so, so much.
There was so much amazing information in this episode, so let's make sure we've gotten the key points and the actions that you can take as a result of this. I'm going to summarise some of what Felice said so that you can really understand it. Number 1, your vaginal microbiome comes from your gut microbiome. It's a delicate collection of bacteria and yeast that are there to prevent disease and keep out pathogens. Number 2, when your vaginal microbiome is dysbiotic, meaning out of its healthy balance, you're more likely to get thrush, bacterial vaginosis, vaginitis, and even STIs like HPV. Number 3, as well as antibiotics, the oral contraceptive pill is known to alter your gut microbiome. Number 4, the oral contraceptive pill, while useful in some cases, is overprescribed and the risks involved are underplayed. There is evidence that the pill increases your risk of cervical cancer and breast cancer. We know that women on the oral contraceptive pill have a higher increase of severe clotting events like DVTs. And they're also up to 30% more likely to develop inflammatory bowel diseases like ulcerative colitis and Crohn's disease. This is a huge conversation and one that needs to happen one-on-one to weigh up the risk versus benefits to you. But if you are taking the pill for PMS or to regulate your periods or just because you have been for a long time, perhaps it's worth seeing a naturopath or integrative GP or even acupuncturist to get to the root of the issue rather than masking the symptoms. Again, seek advice from your practitioner about this. Number 5, your microbiome changes during pregnancy. How amazing is that? A baby inherits its microbiome from their mother. So C-sections or being born to a mother with an unhealthy microbiome can severely impact the infant later in life. There's more on this in episodes 14 and 15 of The Shift Season 1, which is called Are You Bacteria or Human? Number 6, we're now discovering that there are microbiomes all over the body, including in your bladder, the uterus, the ovaries, and fallopian tubes. I can't wait to see the research that develops in this area. Learning is great, but doing is better. So here's my recommendations based on my conversation with Dr. Felice Gersh. Number 1, look after your vaginas, ladies. Stop using tampons and menstrual cups and switch to organic cotton pads. If you have to use a tampon, make sure that it's organic to eliminate the pesticides, glyphosate, and bleaches that it contains. Use only natural-based lubricants and stay away from soaps and body washes with synthetic chemicals. Number 2, if you're prone to urinary tract infections, remember that the vagina is the guardian to the bladder, and the microbiome is often where you need to look. This can become a vicious cycle for women who need to take antibiotics, which damages the microbiome and leaves them more prone to another UTI. See someone who can help you to restore your gut and vaginal microbiome as part of your treatment strategy. I have a lot of people in my Gut Shift program that are there for this reason. Number 3, when you're thinking about your reproductive health, consider your microbiome. There is so much research linking it to all things fertility that we need to look deeper into. And this goes for both men and women. Some of the things that you can do include cutting out sugar and refined grains from the diet, making sure that you have lots of different dietary fibre, and consuming probiotic or fermented foods. Women's health is such an important area and one that rarely gets the holistic view that it needs and deserves. This is one area where you really do benefit from a holistic team approach, and I've found that women who look at all aspects of the issue have the best results. For more info on Dr. Felice Gersh, you can connect with her on social media or visit her website at felicegershmd.com. That's FeliceLgershMD.com, where you can get access to her wonderful book, PCOS SOS, and other amazing resources. Thank you so much for tuning in to this episode of The Shift. I believe that every woman needs to know this info, so please do share with anyone that you think needs to know more about this aspect of their health. And as always, if you do post to social media, please tag myself and Dr. Felice Gersh so that we can say hello. In the next episode of the Expert Series, we have Dr. William Davis, an integrative cardiologist from Milwaukee, Wisconsin, and the author of the acclaimed best-selling book, Wheat Belly. You'll love this conversation. See you soon.
Coming up on The Shift.
Can you tell me about your own personal health story?
Katherine, it's terrible to tell you that I have had virtually everything.
Tell me a bit more about wheat's effect on blood sugar and insulin.
So we've been told that complex carbohydrates are better for us. This is nonsense.
Do you think it's a cultural systematic problem, or do you think it's a problem with the individual physicians?
I think it's both.
Reviews help us know that we're hitting the mark with what you need and help us to shape future seasons. I'd really appreciate it if you could take a few moments to leave us a review. I would love to know what you think.